You're listening to the Passion for the Paranormal podcast with Curry Stegan. Now with weekly episodes. Now sit back, relax, and free your mind and let Curry take you on a journey into the paranormal, the bizarre, and unexplained. And don't forget to subscribe to him on Apple or Spotify or wherever you get your podcasts. And now, here's your host, Curry Stegan.
Well, greetings, fellow truth seekers, and welcome to another episode of Passion for the Paranormal, bringing a passion for the paranormal to you. It's really good to be back here with you once again. I'm really excited to welcome my next guest. He is Simon Bown, and Simon hails from the UK. He is a certified hypnotherapist doing past life regression sessions with his clients. And Simon's also got some cool UFO experiences. And not only is he going to talk to me about his work in hypnotherapy and past life regression sessions, but kind of his overall view of the afterlife. And so really excited to have Simon joining me on the show. I think he's really going to be a great guest. In my new book, Walking in the Shadows, I cover my journey in paranormal investigating for close to 10 years. I also share some pretty cool ghost stories, so I hope you check out the book. You can get a link to the book and my website at passion4theparanormal.com. You can also, if you're interested in being a guest on the show, you can find a link there on the website to fill out a questionnaire to be a guest on the show, or you can simply email me at passion4thepara@gmail.com. Without any further ado, I'm going to get into the discussion here with Simon. Just one more thing, don't miss next week's show when I'm going to have who I consider to be the foremost researcher on near-death experiences, and that is Dr. Jeffrey Long. He is author of Evidence of the Afterlife. So I'm really excited to be welcoming him on the show, so please don't miss next week's episode. And all right, really hope you're going to enjoy tonight's show. I think it's going to be a great one, and thank you so much for tuning into the show. Okay, so joining me on the show today is Simon Bown, and Simon hails from the UK. He has a diploma in Clinical Hypnotherapy, and he is certified in Past Life Regression Therapy with the Past Life Awakening Institute. Simon is fascinated with the notion that consciousness is not a product of the brain, but exists independent of it and acts as a kind of receiver of consciousness, maybe similar to like a radio receiver. He has had his own paranormal experiences, including psychic flashes, UFO sightings, and other strange experiences that are not easily explained. He is also the host of the popular Past Lives podcast, where he talks about things like reincarnation, past lives, and other strange phenomena. Simon, thank you so much for joining me on the show today.
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me.
Absolutely. And this is a topic that I love to cover on the show. Anything to do with past lives, reincarnation, near-death experiences, any of those kinds of phenomena. I love talking about it. I mean, I think it's just truly is intriguing and fascinating to talk about. And not only is it, interesting to talk about, but it seems there's a lot of research behind some of this stuff as well. But maybe if you could take us back, this is, true to form for me. I always like to hear the backstory of my guests. And so maybe if you could kind of take us back to, maybe a shortened version, but maybe you could kind of take us back how the journey started for you and how you got involved in all this.
Well, I suppose I was like a lot of children, getting a great interest in all sorts of paranormal and unexplained and supernatural. And I remember when I was 10 years old, I would take these books out of the local public library, books about Bigfoot and ghosts and UFOs and things, and anything supernatural or paranormal. I was fascinated. But over time, I kind of narrowed it down a bit, my interest. So it was UFOs and kind of like ghosts and the afterlife. And I started going to, this is showing how old I am. I started going to the College of Psychic Studies in the second half of the 1980s. And at the college there, I wasn't a student, but you could pay money to sit with the students there, and they teach psychic stuff, mediumship, channeling, past life regression. And so you could pay just a few pounds and go and sit with one of the students, and they'd practice their mediumship or psychic stuff. And then you pay a bit more, and you can sit with one of the tutors. And so I would go there regularly, and it was a great learning experience to sit with all these people and all this information coming through. And some of it was consistent. And what I learned about it also is how to sit with a medium, because there's a phrase that says, don't feed the medium, which is don't, give them anything really. And one of the mediums that I interviewed on my podcast said to me, they hate it when people sitting with them give them too much information, because then it kind of discounts what they're putting through, because it's like they've already been fed too much stuff. And when 1987, I think it was, I was taken through a past life regression that was really quite impactful on me. And I sat with a channel as well, and there was this woman, and she was about 60, and she went into this meditation, and she started talking with a different voice, different accent, and she was channeling this spirit, this guy who said he was last incarnated on Earth 3,000 years ago, and he had this very spiritual message. And so over time, I was having little psychic flashes, I call them. I got no control over it at all, and any information that came through was pretty useless. It's not like get the lottery numbers or something. And I saw a UFO real close up. I was driving along this motorway, and it was just off the side of the motorway. It's the middle of the night. It was big. It was right there, not just a light up in the sky. I saw the whole craft, which I'm not going to claim it was an alien spaceship, but I don't think we have that technology. And then I've been taken through more and more past life regressions, and all these different things were happening. And I decided that I wanted to take people through past life regressions. And so I went to this really good college in England, and the course in clinical hypnotherapy was 10 months. And it was a really detailed course where there were about 30 of us on the class for those 10 months, and we'd all practice hypnosis on each other. So I was hypnotized so many times, I lost count. I love being hypnotized. And it was a thing where if I was going to hypnotize people and take them through a past life regression, I wanted to be sure that I could do it properly. It wasn't just, I'd do an 8-hour course one Saturday and think, hey, that's it, I'm qualified. So I got my diploma in clinical hypnotherapy, and then I went on to do the certification, and that was an online course where you'd have live calls with the tutor, and he was really good because he wouldn't let you on his course unless he thought you were qualified enough and you were good enough. Because there's some courses you can do online, they're just about making money. They're just, yeah, give us your money, come on the course. But this guy, he had to interview me before he'd allow me to do his course. And so I got that certificate there, and over time, more things were cropping up with me when I was seeing mediums. Weird stuff would happen, and so that's sort of a small history of the paranormal stuff and supernatural things I've been interested in.
Now, Simon, did you have any experiences at a young age?
Well, there's a couple of little things that I'm not sure about, but I don't know if you could call them supernatural or not. I'll tell you what happened. When I was, say, 5 or 6 years old, I woke up in the middle of the night, and it was dark in my bedroom, and I heard what sounded like an animal growling in the room. And I've got no doubts that I was awake. This wasn't a dream. And I was a little kid, and I quickly hid under my covers and just waited. And, it seemed like I was awake for hours and nothing happened. But that growl was not just a little thing in the distance you could mistake. Something was really there. And we didn't have any pets in the house, so I don't know what that was. And that
And
thing that
was
was,
that did that kind of stick with you for a very long time? And were there any sort of strange follow-up experiences that at a young age, or was that about it?
yeah, that stuck with me. And I had a couple of really powerful dreams, where it seemed like when I look back at it now, I could sort of look at it from this age and having the knowledge I have about all these things. But when I was really small, I had these dreams. It seemed like there were these weird creatures that came and collected me and took me somewhere. And it was, it's so odd. It's like what they call high strangeness. It was seemed like I was in a stadium and there were all these identical sort of creatures there, definitely not human, definitely not scary looking, like out of a horror film. And there was something going on the grass down there in the middle of the stadium, but I couldn't quite see what it is or what it was. And I had this feeling while I was being transported, I was holding on to something really tight. And I had that twice. And when I think about it, I was really young then. I might have been 2 years old or 3 years old, but they really stick out. And as I'm telling you about it now, I can still see those images in my mind's eye. So that was, yeah, just the stuff that I can remember from when I was really young.
Yeah, that's pretty remarkable too, because a lot of us can't remember anything that happened at that age. Or if we do, it's you know it's really hard to remember because it just, such a long, especially for me. I'm kind of aging myself, but when I was 2 years old, that was many, many years ago. So it's hard to remember any kind of memories. I think really most memories that come to me were about the age of 4 and uh, and beyond that. So that's pretty remarkable experience. Talk about the UFO sightings. So these did not start until you kind of started getting involved with this stuff, or actually going. I think you mentioned going to the courses.
Yeah, well, what it was, there's a phrase that says something like, when you start looking at this stuff, it starts looking back. And so I was I'm in a band, I'm a bass player, and this is like 1992, 93. I did a gig in out of west of London on a Sunday night. And so I was driving back into London on this motorway called the M40. And as you know, we drive on the left-hand side. And so it's like 1 a.m. and the motorway's in the darkness. There's no street lamps there, and there were no other cars around. And I looked up and I could see ahead to me on the left really bright lights off to the side of the motorway. And I know that motorway well, and I know there's no buildings there. And I thought, that's odd. Maybe they're doing emergency gas main repairs or electricity pylon repairs or something. I don't know. And I slowed down so I could have a look over and see what it was. And I dropped my speed like 5 miles an hour because no other cars around on this motorway. And just as it came into view, I saw this object that was about the size of a large house, shaped like a rugby ball. I suppose you guys would call it a football, that shape, wouldn't you? And it was just 25 feet off the ground, maybe 150 to 250 feet away from me. It was the one half of the bottom of it was covered in many, many kind of pin spot red lights, which I think like we could do that now with LEDs, but I don't know if 1992 those lights have been invented. And at the other end of the craft, there was this really, really bright spotlight pointed at the ground. And it was, I say, bright spotlight. It was almost as if it was a solid pole that was illuminated from inside. It was so bright. But I went past that place 2 or 3 more times over the next week, and there was nothing there. It wasn't like it was a building stuck on a pole or something. And it didn't make a sound. It didn't move an inch the whole time. And I was going like 5 miles an hour, and I was leaning forward and looking up at it through the windscreen. And you do that thing, like a mental checklist. You start thinking, well, it's definitely not an aircraft. Can't be a helicopter because that would make a lot of noise that close by. Can't see that it's a hot air balloon. There's nothing underneath it, because they usually have something underneath, don't they? They call it like a basket or a gondola or something. And I just then when I got past it, it was kind of out of sight, and I increased my speed and went home. And I knew enough to check the clock to make sure there's no missing time. But I did find it a bit weird that since I'm so interested in UFOs, I didn't stop and get a better look at it. It's just like I just carried on, which was weird. And so that was it's like a kick in the pants, really. I heard somebody say once that you don't see a UFO unless they want you to see them. They're perfectly capable of traveling around completely like invisible. You wouldn't know they're there. And so I've got this idea that they showed themselves to me for some reason. I don't know why. And it was a few years later. Again, I'm out gigging, but I'm on my way to a gig this time, and I'm crossing a area down here in the south of England called the New Forest, and it's a national forest, and it's very strictly controlled. So you cannot do any building there. There's wild animals roaming around. I don't know if they're wild. Probably somebody owns them, but you could drive down these little roads. There's enough width for one car, and you'll come round a corner, and there'll be all these horses just standing there in the road, or could be sheep. And so when I saw the UFO over the New Forest, what I saw was this orange orb light, but it was about the size of a car, and it was very, very bright. And again, it just didn't move an inch the whole time, maybe 25 feet or so off the ground, and it lit up the whole area underneath it. And the thought I have is, if the New Forest is so strictly controlled that they don't let you do anything there, they certainly wouldn't give anybody permission to set up a massive spotlight. But also with a spotlight, that's directional, and this thing was lighting up the ground all around it. And there's a weird synchronicity with this, and I'm interested in synchronicities because some of them are just so bizarre. But I was coming back from the gig in this town close to London, and it was maybe 2 a.m. or 3 a.m. And I was listening to this podcast interview with a guy called Joe Montaldo, and the guy interviewing him was called Mike Cleland. And Mike was saying to Joe that about how one night he woke up at his parents' house, and they had a house that was out in the country. It wasn't suburbia. So if you look out his back window, you just see empty fields. And he woke up one night and looked out the back window, and he saw a big bright light and 5 grey ETs walking towards the house. And he heard this sentence in his mind that said, "Now is the time to lie down and shut down." And so that's what he did. He just lay down in his bed and went to sleep, which he said really what he should have done is jumped out of bed and grabbed a baseball bat. But the thing was, when he said that to Joe Montaldo said to him, "And you know what that ball of light was now, don't you?" And the thing was, Joe Montaldo said that at the exact moment I got to that spot where I saw that UFO. And it's like Joe Montaldo was saying it to me. "You know what that ball of light was now, don't you?" And it seemed like such a weird synchronicity there, that the timing was so perfect. And since I have an interest in synchronicities, I read books about it. There's some that turn up that are just so weird that it just seemed like the universe is in some way trying to send you a message. So those two, that's the 2 UFO sightings I've had.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you as well. So, with the UFO sightings, prior to you ever having a UFO sighting, what was kind of your thoughts? Did you follow the UFO subject much? Did you have any interest into it prior to that?
Yeah, I did. Yeah. I remember reading a book about Betty Andreasson in the 80s, and Communion, Whitley Strieber's book, and I was reading stuff by Bud Hopkins, and just this whole alien abduction thing I find so fascinating, because there was a long period where UFO investigators just seemed to be interested in the craft. and you'd read a UFO report, an investigator would report on meeting the witnesses and the whole study, and it was all about the nuts and bolts of it. And I'm thinking, "No, I want to know about the aliens. What about the creatures? What? Who were they?" And it's almost like the UFO investigators were thinking, "No, we're not going to go that far. That's too far. Let's just stick to this nuts and bolts thing." But yeah, so I had a great interest in the abduction phenomena for years, and it's weird because something came up for me related to that in a past life regression that I was being taken through. And I've had other little weird things happen. Like I woke up one night, and in my mind there was this image of a grey, an ET, and I heard these two words in my mind that were really loud. And it's weird to say that. It's like, because there's no volume, is there? If it's in your mind, when you think. And I did talk to Mike Cleland about this because he's had that kind of contact with ETs, and it sounded like it was my own voice, and it just said two words, and I couldn't remember what the words were. But he was saying, yeah, that's almost like what it is when he experienced telepathy with ETs. That it sounds like it's your own voice when these things come through. And I had another time I woke up at night and there looked like these two grey alien faces were being projected onto the wall. And that was really freaky. And it's like, it's so bizarre. And I leaned over and switched the light on, and they couldn't see them because the room was lit up. I switched the light off and they were still there. And you think, what is going on? Why would a projection of these faces be on the wall? And then they started moving. And you could say that, well, you'd just woken up, you were groggy, you were dreaming or something. But when you wake up and see that, and it's so bizarre, and it's got this alien look to it, the adrenaline was in me. I was scared. I was wide awake when I saw that, and those faces were there. So there's those bizarre little things that show up, and just related to that. And when Whitley Strieber published his book called Communion, when he's talking about his alien abduction experiences, he got loads of fan mail. This was, I think, the late 1980s. So, it wasn't email, it was paper letters being sent. And there was like 10,000 letters that showed up. And his wife read every single one of them. And so many of them were people saying, yes, I've had this experience as well, this kind of alien thing. And she said, the more bizarre it is, the story, the more likely she was to believe it. And that makes me think about what I saw there with those two faces on the wall, how bizarre it is. It's high strangeness, and nobody's going to believe you really, but it's when you experience it yourself, it's really quite powerful, and it really makes you think. And that's one of the things about having these psychic flashes as well. You can talk to your friends about it, and they'll very happily discount it and give some small explanation that doesn't make sense, but then they didn't experience it. They don't know how it feels. There's a particular feeling to it which stands out.
And that the experience you just talked about, where the grays, the faces were kind of projected on the wall. Did anything else happen with that experience? I know you said you turned the lights on; they were still there, and then did they just kind of vanish, or and how long did that experience last?
That was only a minute or so, and what they did was they started moving, and when they got to the corner of the room, it's like they went off into the corner and they disappeared. And that was it. And I had a really strong dream, a very vivid dream, where I was outside on a nice summer's day, and the sky was filled with UFOs, like hundreds of them, all different shapes and sizes. And there was another time I had a dream that I just saw all these. This is bizarre. It's like all these mechanical things, machines, and pieces of technology coming towards me. And I woke up from that dream, and I thought, this is weird. And I closed my eyes to go back to sleep, and it was still there. There's stuff coming towards me. And I hear about some people who say they're abducted by aliens about having a download, that there's information coming down into them. I couldn't stop those images for like 30 seconds. I had to open my eyes and switch the lights on. And it's just weird the dreams that have come up and other dreams as well.
Yes, people who have these experiences like you are just talking about you've had, um, sometimes they seem to get messages, whether it's messages about humanity and, perhaps what we're doing to the earth, sometimes even about why they're being visited. But any sort of messages conveyed to you during any of these experiences that made sense to you?
Well, not those experiences, but I can talk about this thing that came up during hypnosis. I was seeing this lady who she was trained in past life regression by Dolores Cannon, and Dolores Cannon has got a lot of books out about alien interaction and past lives and things. And so the whole point of this hypnotic session I was being taken through was reincarnation. It had nothing to do with UFOs and aliens. And she did take me to a past life that I saw when I was in this life. It looked like 16th century Venice, and all these different things happened, and it was quite intense. And then we go through the death of that past life, and I was just looking down on the body, and she said to me, "Okay, just drift away. Just allow yourself to drift away." This really soft, kind of hypnotic voice. And she said, "Just drift away and just tell me the next thing you see." And it was like somebody flicked a switch, and I went from 0 to 100, and I was terrified, and I was shaking. And she said to me after the session, she could see my muscles quivering in my legs and my arms and my stomach. And I saw myself in what you might say is a cliched alien abduction. I was lying on a table. I had these ETs around me, these greys. And I remember that I remember all this stuff there, but I still wouldn't say that it was real. I wonder if my brain, my subconscious, could make up this stuff because I'm so interested in it and I've read so many books. But all this stuff happened while I was lying there on the table, like they were examining me and things. But when you asked me about a message, what happened was the next thing I saw, I was with these ETs and I was in this forest, and it was like a load of the trees had been cut down, and there was this big open area, and I was with all these other adults, and there was a planet in the sky. It was nighttime, and it was very close to the Earth, so close that it's impossible to a planet to be that close to the Earth because, magnetic fields between the two planets would interfere with each other and gravity, and it would probably cause massive earthquakes all over the planet. But coming out of this other planet, there was a pathway leading down to where we were. And there was all these children coming down the pathway, and they were all dressed in white, and all the adults were greeting the children. They were hugging, and everybody looked so happy. And then I had this telepathic message in my mind that said, "When the planets meet, the children will return." And that was the message. And then suddenly I was back in the room, this examination room with the ETs, standing up, and I had an ET either side of me. And they led me to this wall, and the wall opened up like just a hole appeared in it. There wasn't a door there. And the weird thing there was that it was like a cookie cutter shape of me with my arms and my legs and my head. And they said, just step through this space. And I went through this hole, and it didn't lead into another room or a corridor. It was like a big energetic space with all the colors of the rainbow shimmering and moving around. And suddenly I was going through that space at 100 miles an hour, which maybe it was like teleportation or something. And I got the impression there were other people, other humans that were also there, and we're all going in the same direction. And then I found myself in this room that was long and thin, almost like a train carriage, with all these white chairs that came out of the wall. It's like they were part of the wall. And there were clothes all over the floor, and there were other people in there. And some of them were naked. And there were these two greys, and we got this message basically said, no one goes home till they've got their clothes back. And then I walked down to the end of this room, and there was a hole in the floor, and I stepped into that hole, and then I was back in my flat in London, and it was 2 a.m. And I went to bed and then got up the next morning and went to work like nothing had happened. But I find it weird that I got that message about the children returning, because it reminds me of this thing that you hear about in alien abduction of hybrid children, and maybe it was related to that. But then again, I think, well, maybe, my subconscious just made it all up. I couldn't say for sure.
Right. And when you talked about that part of the story, that's kind of what popped into my head was the idea of hybrids, and that the Greys seem to. There's been a lot of abductees who have talked about the Greys having some sort of hybridization program, about eggs being removed from females and sperm being removed from male abductees, and how there seemed to be some sort of hybridization program. So yeah, that's kind of what popped in my head too when you conveyed that from the story. Which is interesting because there's a lot of people who have had those abduction accounts that kind of dovetail with what you just talked about there.
Yeah, it's weird because I described this to the hypnotherapist and said, all that the adults, the children, everybody looks so happy. And she said, "Oh, that sounds positive." But straight away I said no. And I don't know where that came from. I just knew it's no, there's something wrong here. But I don't know. I don't like being negative about all this stuff. I'm more likely to just think, well, we just don't know. We can't say it's positive or negative. There's so many people have so many different experiences.
Yeah, that's a good point. Some people have negative takeaways from their abduction experiences, even experience PTSD, perhaps as a result of their abduction accounts. Different types of even species that are observed during these abduction accounts. What's kind of your thoughts on all this? Do you think maybe there may be some bad and good entities, if you want to call them extraterrestrial, or what exactly do you think we may be dealing with here?
Well, I think one of the things is people might talk about an alien agenda, but it's like saying, what's the human's agenda? If you go to Russia, their agenda is going to be different from the agenda in Australia or North Korea or the USA. So I don't see why there wouldn't be all sorts of ETs with all sorts of agendas. And so this hybridization thing, if all these people are correct, it does seem to be happening. And it's strange. It's the idea that maybe human evolution has been genetically engineered over thousands of years by ETs, and that this hybridization that's happening now is just part of the program they've been doing for thousands of years. Maybe we're just halfway through it. And the humans we see now, this is not the end product. We're just halfway through the design process, and maybe in a few thousand years it will get to a point of where they want it to be. But doing past life regressions and looking at reincarnation, I also get hints of alien stuff through that kind of spiritual area where people can be reincarnated on other planets, and that part of the ET's interaction with the human race is not just physical, but there's something, I don't know, I don't want to say spiritual, but there's something beyond the veil or interdimensional happening. I interviewed a woman on my podcast, and she said that one night she woke up standing next to her bed, and there were four greys at the foot of her bed, and she kind of freaked out, and she looked round, and her body was still in the bed. She was having an out of body experience, and it freaked her out so much when she saw her body. Suddenly, she was back in her body. She sits up, and the greys aren't there. So it's almost like they were in that space, what you might call the astral space, where she went to when she was out of her body. So effectively, they were still in the room, but maybe shifted dimensionally.
Yeah, that's one of the intriguing things about the alien abduction phenomena. People who have interactions with these beings, is it seems to suggest that there's some sort of interdimensionality involved with this, or like you said, some sort of out of body or astral projection type of thing going on. And maybe a lot of times these beings seem to be appearing to people somewhere in that realm.
Yeah, and another thing is that when I take people through past life regressions, and I've done hundreds of them, and I do them over Zoom, so I can connect with people anywhere on the planet. And occasionally, I can think of 4 or 5 times people, when I regress them, I don't tell them which past life to go to. We just see what comes up. And people have said, well, I'm not human. I'm another body. It's an alien body. And
Yeah, that's
I was going to say the thing with past life regression, and this has happened to me, where you can research these past lives that you see in a regression and get forms of confirmation. Some of them can be quite light, but some of them can be very specific, and you can actually track down that person that you would never have known. They're not famous, and so much of what you saw in the past life regression is true.
it's remarkable stuff. And it kind of ties into, reincarnation and having, living multiple lives. I guess I step back for a minute. How long have you been doing hypnotic regression, Simon?
It's it's been about 5 or 6 years now. So yeah, I got my diploma. It's on the wall behind me. I'm just going to look at the date. 2016. Yeah, so since 2016.
And as you're doing these hypnotic regressions now, did you have, it sounds like as part of the learning the process, you go through your own hypnotic regressions. Is that correct?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've been taken through many over the years, decades even. But yeah, we did practice on each other in the classroom.
And did it happen right away for you when you were hypnotized, or did it take a while? Talk about how that kind of happened when you first uh, were hypnotized.
Well, it's in the hypnotic language really. When you go through the hypnotic induction, you're saying to the person, you take them through into the relaxation as the hypnotic state, and you use phrases like "take me to the origin point of an issue you're having in this life, take us back to a past life where this all started," or you may be just doing an exploration. You don't have anything really therapeutic you want to look at, and so we can say, "Take us back to a past life that's related to your current life." And I went straight away. I was there, first past life regression. Back in the College of Psychic Studies in the 80s, the woman led me through it, and it was immediate. It wasn't something that I had to practice. And so that's what I find when I take people through past life regressions. 99% of them go straight to a past life. It's no problem at all.
It's interesting. Now, have you worked with people who are not able to be put under hypnosis? Have you dealt with that as well?
It's very rare. It's a thing I get asked about as well when I have clients when we first start. It's a question of would they be able to do it. Some people doubt they can do it. I had a guest on the podcast who was kind of badgered and bullied into doing a past life regression, and he was a detective and he was a tough guy, and he said, it's all a load of baloney. There's no way they'll even be able to hypnotize me, let alone take me to a past life regression. And he went straight into the hypnosis and went straight into a past life. The very rare cases I've found are it's just people, maybe they've booked their session at 7 p.m. and they've just got back from work and they're stressed out. They've had a bad commute, and you've got to be in the right frame of mind to do hypnosis. You've got to be able to relax into it. And it's about how your mind is being stressed out. Physically, you can be hypnotized even if you've just run a marathon and you're really hyped up physically. It's just that point of being able to relax.
Yeah, and talk about, so when you went through your first few hypnotic regressions, going back to past lives, now when you come to and you're out of hypnosis, do you have full recall of that hypnotic regression session?
Oh yeah, yeah. That's the thing about hypnosis is I think it's portrayed in films and TV as something different to what it actually is. The whole time you're hypnotized, you're just very, very relaxed. You're completely aware of your surroundings. You feel you could get up and stop anytime you want. You remember everything. So it's just almost like when you're in bed and you're falling asleep and you're really comfortable and relaxed. It's that kind of feeling.
Now, have you experienced where people have been taken to past lives, or when they do go to a past life experience? I know you mentioned a frightening experience you had where it was just kind of like a switch went off, and then you mentioned you had an experience with grays. Have you had people have frightening experiences like that from previous lives, and then they decide they don't want to dabble into doing this anymore?
It's interesting about what you'll see during a past life regression. The idea is the life or lives that you see in the session are chosen for you by your higher self or your spirit guides, and they'll give you what's really beneficial for you right now, something that will help you. And if you go to a traumatic scene, there's a reason for it. And they wouldn't give you anything you can't handle. And I've got techniques where we can move out of the emotion of it, but still see what happens. So still get insights and understanding. And so these things can be really quite healing. I've had a couple of times people have had traumatic deaths, but it was very helpful in this life. There was a woman who, had terrible back pain in this life, and we went to a past life, and it seemed to be the 1920s. And what we saw in that past life scene is she was walking down this street at night. Somebody grabbed her from behind, and she was beaten and stabbed in the back, which is obviously very traumatic. But she said where she was stabbed in the back, that exact point is where she has the pain in this life. And so it seemed like something was bleeding through from the past life, some negative energy or some imprint physically. The pain of that stabbing was still with her in this life. And by experiencing it and viewing it, you can release that energy and you can cut that connection to the past life. And I have had clients who have something physical and it's been relieved because of viewing something in a past life. And maybe it's not like 100% relief, but it could be 50%. There was a guy who had this pain in his abdomen, and he was in his 50s, and he said to me that he'd seen doctors and they'd done all the scans and the tests. They could not find any reason for this pain. And we did a past life regression where he was killed by this stabbing in his stomach, in his abdomen. And he talked to me like 2 or 3 weeks later. We did another session, and he said the pain in his stomach's decreased 50%. He said, can't believe it. All these years, he's been trying to remove this pain. And he sits in front of the TV, poking himself in the belly just to test it because he can't believe how much better it is. And then I had a woman client who, in a past life, we were in a forest and she saw herself step in a bear trap. And those big metal claws come up and grab your leg. And she said in this life, at that part of her legs where she has terrible eczema her whole life. And like 6 weeks after the session, she emailed me and said the eczema's completely gone. And it seemed like it was some kind of, a psychological release or something happened by seeing that thing in the past life affected how her skin, her body behaves in this life. But I mean, you could say it's a coincidence, but it's that thing. She said she tried everything. She just could not remove that eczema.
Yeah, that's bizarre. Really is. So getting to what the skeptics or perhaps the cynics would say about past lives, reincarnation, or any of these sort of things. One of the criticisms you'll hear is if we do live multiple lives, and this is all kind of part of a soul progression. Why do we oftentimes not remember past lives, and if we're to learn from them, how do we not remember past lives?
Right, well, it's about your soul learning the lessons, not about you learning the lessons. And your soul will have an overview of all the past lives. And so to come into a life and remember all your past lives and to know that there's an afterlife, that's really going to change the way you behave. But if they want to learn a specific lesson, it's like they incarnate so many times because they want to learn what it is to be human and learn everything that a human experiences, and that's how the soul progresses. And knowing all your past lives and knowing it's only a lesson here on earth, that's going to really dampen down and or maybe just make the lesson pointless because you'll know that it's just a lesson.
Right. Yeah, I want to talk a little bit about near-death experiences and how that may tie into, past life regression as well. When you've had people for the first time go through this hypnosis and then they perhaps see something that's really eye-opening or really awakening for them that happened in a past life, I know we talked before, you have also kind of looked into near-death experiences. Do you think it's a similar kind of effect after they have these kinds of sessions to say someone who has a near-death experience and feels like they kind of step into another realm and then come back?
No, I think it's very different. With the past life regression, you're maybe sitting back in a big comfortable chair or you're lying down and you get all this imagery coming in your mind's eye and you can have emotions and slight physical feelings. But with near death experience, you actually go somewhere. You're transported to another realm. And I don't really consider past life regression to be a spiritually transformative experience in the same way that a near death experience can be. So the people who have a near death experience, it transforms them fundamentally and for the rest of their lives. And past life regression isn't that powerful. But it can be very helpful and give all sorts of insights and understandings. But there's I heard some kind of statistic like 70% of people who have a near-death experience are divorced within a year or two because it changes them so much, and their partner are looking at them and they're like, I don't know who this person is anymore. Particularly if the person who has the experience is very kind of money orientated and atheist, and they've got a great job and a big house, and they come out of the near death experience and they're like, that money's not important anymore. I don't want possessions. I'm not going to chase money anymore. And they take a much more spiritual path. And their partner might be looking, hey, I do like the money. I want the money. What do you mean you're not getting money anymore? So you can see how it would cause a problem.
I've kind of heard the same thing as well, is that the person comes back a new person. They have a new kind of zest for life, no longer really fear death like they do before. I was just wondering, kind of the bleed over from past lives. Now, when you had your experiences with past lives and after you had them, what was how did it change you? How did it impact you personally?
You get more of a feeling and an understanding that there is an afterlife, that when you die, you're not just completely annihilated. And because I've seen things in past lives that then I've gone on to find them, and it's been a confirmation that those things were real. And so you get that feeling. And there's also a technique called life between lives, where you don't go to a past life, you go to that space, which you might call it the afterlife, where after you died and you go back to that space and you go and you meet all sorts of other spirits there and go through these different processes and then prepare to be reincarnated. And it does make you more and more realize that there is an afterlife. And it's like when you research near death experiences, that gives you the information, children with past life memories and mediumship and deathbed visions, and there's all these different aspects. They're all like puzzle pieces, and they all point to the same thing. And when you find that there are some really serious people researching it, scientists and PhDs who will say, yes, consciousness isn't a product of the physical brain. It's coming from somewhere else. And when the brain dies, consciousness continues.
Right. And I think that's one of the most fascinating things as well about all this stuff we're talking about that seems to be kind of related with overall consciousness as well. Simon, how many people that you've dealt with or you've done past life regressions with who have actually, because I know you mentioned that people actually have reported having another life that perhaps is not human, maybe is extraterrestrial. How many people would you say percentage wise have reported experiencing that?
Oh, when I've done it, it's tiny. I don't know how many sessions I've done, but it is hundreds of them. I do them just about every single day, and I can think of 4 or 5 people that have seemed to have just gone straight to another planet. And it's like I said, I don't say, okay, we're going to go to a past life in ancient Egypt, or we're going to go here or there. I just say, okay, so now you're in a past life. So where are you? And there was a woman who was, I asked her and she just remained quiet. And I asked her again, what are you experiencing? And she kind of giggled and she sounded embarrassed. And she was saying, I've got too many knees. I'm not in a human body. I'm in a desert somewhere and I'm looking down and I'm not dressed, but this isn't a human body. And there was another guy who was on a planet that seemed to be all water. And he was some kind of creature, aquatic being that was intelligent, just as intelligent as us, maybe more intelligent, and that he was working as an assistant to help another creature that was much, much bigger than him. And so that was fascinating. And he was told by his spirit guide that this life on Earth was his first life on Earth, and that he'd had many, many other lives in other places.
That's fascinating that people have those kinds of visions of previous life. Does it, for you, has it led you to believe that perhaps you've led other lives as non-human?
Well, I tend to think everybody has. There's this guy I interviewed a couple of times called Richard Martini, and he takes people through that space between lives. And there was one point he was taking somebody through it, and there was an alien there in that space, the afterlife space. And he said to him, "Look, ask that alien, have you had a life on Earth?" And the alien said, "How dare you? I wouldn't lower myself to having a life on Earth." But it's a thing where he was also said, humans are so arrogant. They think they're the only planet with life in the universe, when in fact there's billions of planets with life, and we all live so many lives on so many planets. Because it's one of those skeptical things that people might say about reincarnation, that if you go back in time, there was a point where the human population was just a billion people, and now we're up to maybe 8 billion. So where do all the new souls come from? But if you think that there's billions of planets with life in the universe, there's easily enough souls there to start incarnating on Earth.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I've heard. I always like to kind of address the skeptical or the cynic viewpoint on this stuff, and some of it comes from the hypnotic regressions that alien abductees or experiencers have had, in that they're kind of being led in the hypnotic regression session. What say you about that?
Yeah, that's the one of the things that they kind of drilled into me when I was in training is you cannot lead. You have to have open questions, basic questions. You might offer, like you might say to somebody, so in that space, in that past life, are you alone or are there other people with you? So that's an open question. You're not saying, okay, in that space, who's with you? So you're kind of leading them to make them think there's people with them. But I do find that people, it's very hard to lead someone. I don't try and do it. Occasionally I'll ask a question. They might say, okay, I'm in the dinner table now with my family. It seems like it's the Victorian era, and my husband's there and my two children. And I might ask them a question about that, and then they'll say, no, 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 that's not right. And it's a thing where they couldn't be led. And the Bud Hopkins, who used to take people through alien abduction hypnosis to see what happened, he had a thing where he would say to the person while they're hypnotized, they might say, I'm on board this craft with these ETs. And he'd say, okay, so what about the guy in the yellow shirt? Lots of people always say there's a guy with the yellow shirt. You see the guy with the yellow shirt? So he's deliberately trying to lead them. He's testing them to see how suggestible they are, to see if they can be led. And he said that so often people would just say, no, there's no one there with a yellow shirt. So when he really tried to do it and really pushed it on them, they'd still refuse to be led. So it's a kind of a combination with it. When you work with a client, you don't know how suggestible they are and if they can be led. So you do your best not to do anything that could lead them.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it certainly does kind of help address the skeptical point of view on this. What about this idea of life reviews after someone has completed a life here on Earth? Have you come across that in your work?
Well, that will come up in the life between lives kind of past life. It's not past life, is it? It's between lives in that kind of hypnotic thing. And I haven't been trained to do that. So I don't take people through it. I've been taken through it and I've read books on it about what the theories are of the life between life space. And what I get from that is a bit different to what I get from people who've had near death experience. But yeah, that life review does show up, and it's that thing where you might be with your spirit guides, and they give you the life review, and they're just very supportive of you, and you're not judged in the afterlife. If anything, the only judge is yourself, and you judge your actions of your past life. But there's a guy called Michael Newton. I don't know if you know him. He he's passed on now, but he took 7,000 people through these regressions into that space between lives, and he didn't brief them at all. And 7,000 people didn't know each other, but they consistently said the same things of what happens in between lives. And that's why his books are so powerful, because it's the consistency. Everybody's saying the same thing. And you can't imagine there's 7,000 people who are contacting each other and, like saying, you go to see Michael Newton, make sure you tell him this thing. We'll fool him. And he's the guy that originated that technique of hypnotizing people and taking them into that space between lives. And so the life review thing does come up, but it seems it's not focused on like it is in near-death experiences.
Yeah, it's interesting because you mentioned a lot of the cases were similar. And I think of Jeffrey Long, Evidence of the Afterlife, and all the now that's the near-death experience phenomena, but very similar in terms of how a lot of the cases they're been reported across the globe, and there's a lot of consistent themes. They're not all exactly the same. There are differences, but there's also there seems to be some consistent themes as well with the experiences, and they've amassed over 5,000 cases. So seems in that respect, you mentioned Michael Newton, the research he did. It seems kind of in that sense, it seems similar to the research like Jeffrey Long's done into near-death experiences, and that where a lot of people have what they've reported experience, and even from different cultures, different backgrounds, different social economic status, all kinds of different people in different walks of life have reported very similar things in their experiences and near-death experiences.
Yeah, yeah. And with near-death experiences, one thing that I find particularly interesting is when somebody will see something while they're dead and then report on it after they're resuscitated, and it's correct. And the medical staff would say to them, "You couldn't possibly know that. You were dead. You were hooked up to these machines. Your heart had stopped. Your brain was flatlined." And I've I'm so interested. I remember all these different cases. Like there was a guy who died on the operating table, and he floated up out of his body, and he went up into the floor above in the hospital, a hospital he's never been in before. And he said he saw this hospital ward with all these beds with mannequins in, like from shop mannequins, and all these tables in the middle with computers on. And he thought it was so weird that that would be in a hospital. Why would they have mannequins? And so he told the nurse about it when he was resuscitated. And she said, "You couldn't know that. That's our teaching ward. These are special medical mannequins. We practice CPR on those. And the computers are where we sit when we're in training." And there was another one, this woman, she died on the operating table, and she went into the operating theatre next door and she saw them amputating a leg, and she described how it was happened and how they put this leg in this big yellow plastic bag. And she told the surgeon about it when she was resuscitated, and the surgeon went off to check. He didn't know what was happening in the room next door, and she was correct about the amputation, how it happened, how they put it in this big yellow bag. And these cases go on and on. It's not just one of them. There are many, many of them where people see stuff happen while they were dead. And I interviewed Dr. Eben Alexander, who was professor of neurosurgery at Harvard Medical School. And he said that, when your heart stops, your brain's flatlined. There is no way you can make and retain complex memories. And yet that's what people do. And he's that guy at Harvard Medical School. And he said to me, he's absolutely sure that consciousness is not a product of the brain. And him being a neurosurgeon, he knows about the brain.
This stuff, it just kind of, it blows your mind. And from what I understand of Eben Alexander, he was a skeptic about the afterlife and about consciousness living on outside of the brain before he had his near-death experience, which is just, it's pretty remarkable. We're getting short on time here, Simon. I want to ask one more question here. What about the idea of ghosts and people kind of being stuck in this earthly plane after they pass on?
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there seems to be two different basic types. There seem to be ghosts or spirits or apparitions that are intelligent and react when they're confronted. But then there also seem to be ghosts or apparitions that are like, kind of like recordings, and that people will go to a building, and lots of people over the years will say the same thing. They see somebody there doing something, and it's like it's a recording. It's not an intelligent apparition. And I'm reminded of the near-death experience of a guy called Howard Storm, and he had a distressing near-death experience where he was an art professor taking some students around Europe. He was from the States, and he was taking them through Europe, and he had this terrible thing happen with his stomach while he was in Paris. And he went to a Paris hospital, and they were waiting for a surgeon. There was no surgeon at the site, and somebody had to come drive in to help him. But he found himself outside of his body, and he was looking down at the bed, and he was confused, thinking, "Hey, hang on a second, I feel fine now. And why does this guy in the bed look just like me?" But there were these voices in the hallway saying, "Hey, Howard, come on, it's time to go." And he thought, "Oh, right, it's time for my operation." And he went out there, and there's all these people, and he went with them, and they were walking down this hallway in the hospital. And he said he remembers looking down the hallway thinking, "Man, I didn't remember the hallway being this big. This building's enormous." But it turned out that this was part of his near-death experience. His consciousness had left his body, and there were these other people there who became really quite nasty. And so it makes me think, who are those people? Are they lost spirits? Could they be ghosts, perhaps, and under some circumstances. It's almost like there are people who die and they do get stuck on Earth, or they get stuck in a dark place, and it's all down to your frame of mind. And that if you do die in that condition, you can be lifted out of it. And I've heard also, not to be too negative about this, that there are people who may have killed themselves and they go into the light, they go into heaven, they don't get condemned to somewhere dark or hell or something. And so the thing about ghosts and apparitions, I do think there is something going on there, but that's not really something I've researched a lot. I've talked to mediums a lot and people who research mediumship, and they talk about spirits and communication. But yeah, so I wouldn't say I'm an expert, but I do think there's something going on there. You got to be real careful with it, though, haven't you?
Yeah, perhaps you do. And I often wonder if in some way, when some people pass on, it's kind of this idea that maybe perhaps we create our own hell by our own thoughts, our own vibration. There's a lot of talk about frequency. And so maybe perhaps it has something to do with that, but it's really, it's one of those things. I've been a paranormal investigator for a number of years, and I often have these thoughts as well. What exactly is a ghost? And it's something it's really hard to kind of put your finger on.
Yeah, and the people I've talked to who've seen them have said that when they've seen the apparition, the ghost, it's like you're just seeing a person that's in the room. They're not transparent. And there was one guy, I don't know if you talked to him, Richard Estep. He's an investigator and he writes some great books. He was at a place where it was kind of like this show of a thing called the Haunted Hospital, and he saw a little girl dressed up in one of the costumes, and he went to the people afterwards and said, "Hey, I didn't know you had children doing this." And they're like, "We don't have children doing this. Whatever she was wearing at the time, we don't do that." So he thought to himself, "Oh man, I actually saw a ghost and I didn't even realize."
It's interesting stuff. Yeah, I'm familiar with Richard's work and his books. Well, Simon, it's been a great discussion and very, very, very intriguing stuff and interesting work you're doing. How, whether they want to find the podcast or find out more about you and the work you do, how do people find out more about you?
Well, I've got my website, which is pastliveshypnosis.co.uk, and that can link through to the past life regression. And if people are interested in doing a past life regression, they can book a free consultation call on Zoom that lasts 20 minutes if you're just interested in thinking about doing it. The podcast is called Past Lives Podcast, but I think I've just released episode 260. Each one is an hour-long interview with somebody who's an expert or had an experience. I also produce a podcast called the Alien UFO Podcast, and that's over 60 episodes, and they're on just about every podcast app. You can find those quite easily.
All right, great. And I think the important thing as well is somebody want to do a session with you. They don't have to be in the UK, right? I mean, you can do these via Zoom or other means. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do most of the sessions on Zoom. I've had clients in New Zealand, Australia, Russia, Norway, and Sweden, South Africa, South America. So yeah, and it's just about a connection between people by talking to each other. And mediums do sessions over Zoom as well. It's about an energetic connection between people. And when you're being led through the hypnosis, it's all about the voice and what you're hearing. It's not about being in the room with somebody.
Right. Well, great stuff, Simon, and interesting work. And thank you so much for talking with me today. And you have a great, I know you're in the UK, way ahead of me in time. Have a
Yeah.
great, what's left of the rest of your evening. And thanks again.